Good morning, everyone. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone for the second day of CUTRIC's second annual Zero Emission Bus Technologies and Transit Operations Conference. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly share that we've got closed captions available in both French and English. You can enable this tool by clicking directly below the video stream. By the way, my name is Soumya Bhavsar. I'm project manager on the Pan-Canadian Hydrogen Fuel Cell Demonstration and Integration Trial at CUTRIC. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the first of the day's panels themed on policy solutions and alternative thinking on zero-emission transit systems. This particular panel is called Renewable Natural Gas Zero Emissions Transit, the other zero emissions transit solution, which we often fail to consider when we think about zero emissions transit solutions. I'm joining you today from Calgary, Alberta, and in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, including Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Îyârhe Nakoda Nations, the Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. I'd also like to thank our gold sponsor for today, for this panel, Ricardo Rail, for sponsoring this panel. And that said, a quick introduction to the panel itself. So we've got thousands of RNG-fueled buses already in transit fleets across the United States. The fuel is already playing a vital role in reducing transit emissions. This particular panel will bring together transit agency participants in CUTRIC's ongoing RNG feasibility and emission studies, along with industry participants. And the findings of this ongoing feasibility study will be shared by Parvathy Pillai, who's the ZEB Consulting Services Manager at CUTRIC. We've also got representatives from Enbridge, as well as Fortis BC, who are some of Canada's biggest natural gas suppliers. And they will discuss how RNG can help Canada achieve its ambitious emission reduction targets. A quick introduction to our panelists as well. So joining our panel today, we've got Parvathy Pillai, who's Program Manager of ZEB Consulting Services and Business Development at CUTRIC. We've got Maureen Cosine-Heath, who's Director of Transit at the City of Hamilton. We've also got Steve Kay, who's Manager of Business Development at Enbridge. And we've got Adwin Ramakrishnan, who's Senior Manager of Business Growth at Fortis BC. With that said, we will kick off the panel presentations now. I'd like to invite, before that, I would also like to just have a quick look at our sponsor, Ricardo's. We've got a video from Ricardo Rail, which we'd like to play for you before I invite on stage Parvathy Pillai to start with the presentations.
Hydrogen is a really versatile energy vector, and when we release that energy, we can do that in a completely clean way without releasing greenhouse gases. And this is where we see hydrogen as allowing us to move on that net zero journey.
The challenge for those businesses that are looking to adopt hydrogen is that understanding the benefits of hydrogen versus other energy carriers and fuels is complex. We work with a wide range of customers, and to support them, we have a wide range of services. It covers everything from the market entry strategy and understanding the technology, understanding the impact that technology has on the environment. We can build technology roadmaps and we look at market forecasts. We can support our customers in helping them understand the life cycle impacts and undertake life cycle analysis, helping to build them an economic model which looks at the hydrogen infrastructure. We can help them with the operating expenditure, the capital expenditure, and also modelling and looking at the pump price itself. We can help with supply chain development for fuel cells, and we can cover not only the hydrogen fuel cells, but also hydrogen internal combustion engines too. We can support with regulatory and policy analysis, and also build total cost of ownership models to support our clients. The landscape is very complex. Hydrogen is a very complex topic. What our customers are looking for is somebody who can bring clarity to that complexity.
So as you notice, we do support a diverse set of alternative fuels here at CUTRIC. However, focusing on RNG today, I'll pass on the mic to Parvathy Pillai. Parvathy.
Thank you so much, Soumya. Good morning. Hi, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be having the opportunity to present before you our third option to go to zero emission, which is renewable natural gas. I do want to extend my thanks to Enbridge Gas, and Steve is already speaking here at this panel as well, but Enbridge Gas funded CUTRIC to undertake this international study to look at the business case for renewable natural gas as a zero emission transit solution. And we undertook that study involving the partnership of 5 transit agencies all across North America. And I do want to thank Hamilton Street Rail, and Maureen is already here as well. So thanks to HSR for providing us with the data. And we also received data support from Calgary Transit, TransLink, Riverside Transit Agency, and Orange County Transportation Authority in the States as well. So thanks to all our champions who have enabled us to complete this study on considering and preparing a business case for renewable natural gas to serve as a zero emission transit solution. So I'm here to present a few outcomes from our study. But before I do, I just want to give a quick overview on our tool that we use for this particular analysis. So if you were here yesterday, when we launched our third generation of the tool, we are in the third generation of our RUDI predictive performance modeling simulation tool and the second generation of our cloud transit tool. So over multiple years, CUTRIC has refined our tool set to include multiple functionalities and sophisticated methodologies to ensure our clients' needs are met. So in this particular case, we used a combination of RUDI as well as cloud transit because there is a predictive component wherein we looked at the blending ratios involving different combinations of CNG and RNG to reach a zero emission solution. And there is a empirical analysis component wherein we looked at the data emerging from the champion transit agencies that I listed to look at what is the art of the possible in terms of operationalizing a CNG fleet with RNG in the pipeline and the merits that they are deriving from it as a zero emission solution. So this is the tool set that we used, and as is listed here, it has the capacity to do predictive performance modeling and predicting the state of charge, calculating replacement ratios, etc. So quickly on renewable natural gas, which is the topic of this particular panel here, renewable natural gas is basically something that can result from the decomposition of organic matter, and the main constituent of that is methane, CH4. It is chemically identical to fossil fuel compressed natural gas. It's very much identical to the natural gas, and we can have the benefit of leveraging infrastructure for CNG. So if a transit agency is currently operating CNG buses, there is no infrastructural modification that they need to undertake to engage or to incorporate RNG into the mix. Basically, the CNG buses can operate on CNG RNG fuel combination. The beauty of RNG is that it is actually having like a 25 times global warming potential of methane, of carbon dioxide actually in methane. So basically, RNG can be low carbon or even carbon negative because it would avoid the emission of that methane, which would have otherwise like dissipated into the atmosphere, and through other activities like agriculture or landfill, etc. So methane has a much higher GWP or global warming potential than carbon dioxide. So it is a highly potent GHG. That's the reason why it is important for us to ensure it is captured and utilized for these purposes, which can serve as a zero emission transportation solution. So if you look at the carbon intensities of CNG RNG blends, so this is a graph that shows the carbon intensity in kilogram carbon dioxide per diesel liter equivalent on the y-axis and the blend ratios on the x-axis. So we are of course using diesel as our baseline there, wherein you would notice it's at around the 3.65 kilogram carbon dioxide equivalent per diesel liter equivalent. And if it is pure CNG, there is no RNG in the pipeline at all, which is denoted by the 0% mark. You would notice that the carbon intensity factor is around like the 2.2 mark. As the blending ratio increases, you would see the carbon intensity factor starts to drop, and the different modes of producing RNG that can be blended with the CNG are listed here, and different sources have different potentials in terms of reducing the CI factor. So these are projections made from studies conducted across the United States, because we have more data available in the US in terms of these RNG sources and the carbon intensity factors. So we have used those literature results for this particular analysis in terms of establishing it, because the market is much more developed in the United States. We have done the appropriate conversion to the Canadian context to present this particular figure here. But my point is, as the blending ratio moves forward, you would notice that the CI factor reduces, and different sources of RNG would have different implications. So for example, the animal manure would make it carbon negative to -8, whereas the landfill would be having like a slightly higher than 0. If you look at the operational costs in terms of the projections with respect to the blending of CNG with RNG and the different sources of RNG, as we have noted down below, you would notice a similar graph, but in the opposite side, because RNG is an expensive fuel as it stands at this particular point. As you can see from the cost in Canadian dollars per kilometer listed on the y-axis against the blend ratio on the x-axis. As we go from pure CNG to a blended CNG RNG combination, you would notice that the price point increases. And in the case of one particular RNG source, like municipal solid waste, it actually crosses the diesel like a price point as well. That has to do with the fact that RNG market is being developed, and our utility partners are leading that initiative. And once it is having that supply chain established more clearly, and the costs get reduced, then we would be having like a business case that is more economically friendly for the transit agencies as well, if you're considering it from the cost perspective purely. But the important point to note is the transit agencies, if you're looking at it from the transportation fuel side, you don't need to have like a blending ratio of 80% to attain carbon neutral. You can actually have a much lower blend ratio and still attain zero emissions. So that is the beauty of RNG in the case of operation, serving as an operational fuel. With that, I would like to thank you, and I'm open for any questions at the end. Thank you. Back to you, Sami.
Thank you, Parvathy. Actually, a crisp presentation that sheds some valuable context on an often overlooked fuel source and fueling solution. Yeah, it was good to get some insight on the carbon intensities and how they change with the blend ratio and so on. That said, it's time we got some more perspective on RNG based transit solutions from one of our transit partners here. So we've got Maureen joining us from the city of Hamilton. Maureen.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Wonderful. Okay, good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate on this panel to talk about renewable natural gas as an alternative fuel source in public transit. Hamilton, Ontario is part of the GTHA area with a population of just over 500,000. And of course, like many municipalities, we are growing at a pace that exceeds projections. Our council has taken proactive steps to lower emissions in a couple of key ways. Back in 2019, the City of Hamilton declared a climate emergency and set out to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Furthermore, our City Council has declared that we are no longer to purchase diesel buses, and this has been in place for some time now. So our city recognizes that transit plays a vital role in the city's continued commitment to achieving net zero by greening our fleet and providing an environmentally sound choice for customers to travel by. So we are committed at Transit in doing our part to meet this shared goal. At HSR, we're approximately 150 years old, starting mostly way back when with streetcars. We have roughly 279 buses in our fleet, and we operate 35 different conventional transit routes. Our service area spans 243 square kilometers, and we have a broad swath of rural land surrounding our urban area. Our accessible services are fully contracted out to a nonprofit provider who has done so for the city for many years. The HSR division is part of the city's Public Works Department, and we employ more than 800 full and part-time staff. In Hamilton, we're currently in the midst of many transformational transit projects funded by our three levels of government. We're building a new MSF in the lower city, which will be provisioned for electric should we choose to swing our fleet that way in the future. We are midst network reconfiguration based on the voice of the customer as the key driver. And of course, we are working with Metrolinx to bring LRT to life on our B line of our BLAST network, which is our 5 core future rapid transit lines. Our history with compressed natural gas at Hamilton is longstanding. In fact, we had a series of buses rebuilt to be natural gas compatible in the 1985 to 1990 time frame. So we're very proud of our legacy of being one of the greenest fleets in Canada. We led the industry as an early adopter of compressed natural gas and since the 1980s, and of course recently partnered with Enbridge to introduce the first renewable natural gas bus in Ontario. And it's powered by the fuel from Storm Fisher in London, Ontario. This started back in 2021, and we launched a one-year pilot to demonstrate the reduced emissions from this public transit vehicle. During this time, this bus used and diverted 450 tons of organic waste from landfill. That's the equivalent of 38 garbage trucks. And we displaced emissions from 36,000 liters of diesel. Those results were achieved from one bus alone. The pilot was so successful, we're extending it through 2022 while we continue to explore the market for a potential shift to RNG buses as we continue on our path to net zero. We see RNG as a viable alternative fuel source for many reasons. First of all, there's no real changes required to our fleet. We change out the fuel source. So an NG bus can easily be powered by RNG. This means no extensive new capital bus purchases required or ancillary services like charging stations or additional batteries. We also note that it's cost comparable to diesel fuel. Overall, in Hamilton, the state of our fleet is in really good shape. We are almost operating at 50% CNG RNG, and by the end of this year, 2022, that number will increase to almost 70%. As we replace and expand our articulated fleet, all of them will be powered by CNG RNG by the end of this year. So the migration to net zero is very much a progression along a continuum. And in Hamilton, we're in an excellent starting position, given that only about 30% of our fleet will be on diesel by the end of this year. Fuel propulsion systems are undergoing exponential technological advances, and electrification is, of course, a hot topic. As many of the panelists made clear yesterday, Preparation for electrification takes a significant amount of work. It completely overhauls the way a transit agency operates. Our mutual challenge is the push and pull effect of the overall project timelines. Political actors in the space tend to downplay or not fully understand the magnitude of change that is required to adopt this new technology. And they don't recognize that the purchase of an electric vehicle is likely at the later stages on the continuum of a journey towards electrification. It is truly sector disruptive technology. But for these reasons, RNG remains an attractive option for us. We are able to leverage our existing fleet infrastructure and other infrastructure to reduce emissions. We can get to a fully powered NG fleet within the next 3 to 4 years here in Hamilton. So this buffer provides us a lot of lead time to carefully watch the pilots and launches in other agencies and learn from the sector as we watch electrification maturation. Ultimately, we have had no performance issues with the RNG bus and have been very, very pleased indeed with the results of the pilot. And for us, the consideration for expansion of RNG as a fuel source just makes sense. And we are continuing to explore that now. Thank you very much. And I'd be pleased to answer any questions later on in the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Maureen. Actually, really interesting to hear the perspective of a particular transit agency and a region on how best to shoot for climate targets. And looks like phasing out at a certain pace is as important to consider as jumping right into the game of disruptive technologies like electric buses. So yeah, thanks for shedding a bit of light on your perspectives on RNG buses, Maureen. Next, we've got Steve Kay from Enbridge, who will shed some light on the supply side of this fuel. Welcome on stage, Steve, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Samia. Just quick sound check. Everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. So thanks for the opportunity to speak today about the tremendous opportunities with renewable natural gas. It was great to hear Maureen's feedback on the progress so far. So this pathway offers affordable and deep carbon reductions without most of the complexities of other options. It's already being widely used in the United States, as Samia mentioned. And in fact, on January 30th, 2022, the California Air Resources Board released data for its low carbon fuel standard program for the first 3 quarters of 2021, which showed this as the only carbon negative pathway at minus 28.17 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule. Now, we often get asked, but how can RNG be carbon negative? So we've prepared a brief video, just a quick 2-minute video to explain, and I'm hoping that we can cue it up here now. Thank you very much. If we could move to the next slide after that one, that'd be great. So now that we understand how and why RNG can contribute to deep carbon reductions, I'd like to provide a brief overview of the economic and environmental story relative to diesel. This particular example is a deployment of 100 buses in service for 12 years. The economics are scalable to more or less buses. I just used 100 as a placeholder in this case. Also, the economics get even better if the buses are operated for longer than 12 years. There are a few incremental costs with natural gas buses relative to diesel. These include the cost to purchase the bus, modify maintenance facilities, and train maintenance technicians and drivers. This amounts, in a 100 bus deployment, this amounts to about $8 million. Fueling the buses with 100% conventional natural gas and 0% renewable natural gas yields a 12-year total fuel savings of about $32 million. Netting off the cost of the incremental capital of $8 million yields a net benefit of $24.6 million for a 91% IRR on the $8 million of capital invested, while providing a fleet-wide carbon reduction of 38,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. Now, using a portion of those $24 million in benefits to purchase a 50% RNG blend results in an 85,000 ton CO2 equivalent carbon reduction, while still delivering nearly a $10 million benefit, or a 49% IRR on the $8 million of invested capital. And finally, in the last scenario, spending all of the net financial benefit of $24 million and getting back to parity with diesel will allow for a 100% RNG blend, resulting in complete elimination of diesel emissions for 131,000 tons of CO2 equivalent reduction. As a further note on these incredible economics, most natural gas fleets are also reporting maintenance cost reductions relative to diesel, but I've excluded that in this analysis to be conservative. These economics also exclude the benefit of the clean fuel regulation credits that will also be generated when that comes into action. And all of this is possible today with no government grants. On to the next slide, please. Now at Enbridge, we offer a comprehensive turnkey package to transit fleets to help make deployment easier. We can cover all of the incremental capital requirements relative to diesel, that being that $8 million I referenced earlier, in exchange for a long-term fueling agreement. We can also design, build, operate, and maintain all of the natural gas fueling facilities so that transit agencies can focus on running and maintaining their fleets. And in fact, that's exactly what we're doing with Hamilton right now. So in quick summary, I just wanted to point out some of the benefits with an RNG deployment. Technology is commercially ready and proven and supported by major OEMs. You can achieve carbon negative performance. It has similar operational performance to diesel with no range or bus size limitations, which allows for a 1-for-1 replacement of diesel buses. And buses can be refueled in 5 minutes. And finally, the fuel is delivered through the underground natural gas system with much greater reliability in severe weather events than other energy delivery systems. So that is a very quick summary of both the benefits and the economic story, and I look forward to taking questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Succinct summary at the end for sure, and some valuable perspective on the economics of RNG buses, especially incremental costs over just pure CNG buses. It was also good to learn a bit about the low carbon fuel standard and its impact, and the assessment of RNG as a fuel under the LCFS. That said, next we've got Arvind Ramakrishnan from Fortis BC, yet another jurisdiction where the low carbon fuel standard is a go-to policy instrument to support alternative fuels such as this. Arvind, I look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, good morning here from the west coast of Vancouver, and thanks to CUTRIC again for the opportunity. My other panelists have already explained how RNG offers a critical and an affordable pathway for zero emissions and the economics around it. So I'm going to skip all of that and maybe talk a little bit about supply and what we have been doing here in the west coast to bring on stream, and maybe give a little bit of a picture on some of the transit agencies here and what they have done with the adoption of RNG, and perhaps also touch on the low carbon fuel standard here that has played such a crucial role in the adoption of renewable natural gas in the region here. Um, I think I'm going to I'm going to skip a few of these slides in the interest of time. This is Fortis PC. This is the company I work for. The only key message here is we understand both gas and electric systems. So we are a gas utility, but we also have a very decent electric footprint. So we do have got more than 500 battery chargers, public charging stations, and we have also built and own and operate more than 21 natural gas fueling stations and fuel 7 marine vessels. So we understand both systems, and our pathway to net zero is a bit of a diversified pathway. So we believe in all forms of energy and all forms of system. We just can't have a lot of emphasis put on the weakest link, which is electricity. So we just want to ensure it's a diversified pathway. And as you can see in our own roadmap, a lot of it is natural gas today. But if you look at 2050, more than 80% of our energy that's going to flow through our grid is going to be a combination of renewable gas, including hydrogen, and a large portion of that is anticipated to feed some of the transportation network that we anticipate to build over time. Very quickly, want to touch on a enabling policy here, which is called Greenhouse Gas Reduction Regulation. This regulation alone allows Fortis PC to procure natural gas at up to about $30 a gigajoule. I think Maureen had referenced Tom Fisher. So we do have a supply agreement with them to bring about 200,000 GJs of gas today, including both on system and off system. So this enabling regulation was very powerful for us to acquire gas. So we don't have to go to our commission each time to execute supply contracts. These contracts are 10 to 20 years at length, and are negotiated. So, and once we meet the criteria, the BCUC approves it. We can acquire up to 15%. So that's about 15 petajoules of gas that we can acquire and bring on stream to both feed our residential markets, commercial buildings sector, and the transportation sector. I want to quickly chat about price here. So the carbon intensity for the fuel is important. There is a lot of talk about negative carbon intensity. That little graph you see, it's not updated yet, but it is showing the carbon intensities of fuels as published by the British Columbia Low Carbon Fuel Standard. We do have the equivalent of the California here in BC as a BCLCFS standard. We are yet to watch and see how the BCLCFS intersects with the CFS standard, the Canadian fuel standard, when it comes on stream. But as you can see here, our CNG is about 9.7 grams of CUTE per megajoule. But I do know that that number is more trending towards zero now with some of the other projects that we're bringing on stream, which have a CI of like -20 or -30. So the weighted average of that is going to push further down, which actually allows our customers to monetize credits. So that chart there is maybe a little complicated to understand and read, but maybe what is trying to interpret that is at the current price of renewable natural gas, which is about $12 a gigajoule, which is about 3 times more than the conventional commodity. So yes, it's expensive, but at about $120 a ton, the value of our CNG is the same as conventional commodity. And the current market price as published in the last quarter for that price of carbon is north of $400 a ton. So our transit agencies are actually somewhat making money by monetizing credits in our RNGs. It's not even at parity with diesel. It's actually even more cost effective than conventional CNG today at the current prices and where the market has gone for the carbon. Speaking of customers, we have about I think a stat was referenced about 600 or 700 CNG buses across Canada. I'm quite happy to say more than half of that is right here in British Columbia. We have about 400 CNG buses, and both transit agencies have fully adopted RNG or RCNG at 100% for their entire fleet. And the reason for that is simply economics, because you can see it in your charts there that they are able to monetize credits there, and as such make sure the costs are somewhat comparable with what they pay on the conventional side, while achieving deeper emission reductions. This is our supply outlook. As you can see here, we started off very, very small, and then once the enabling regulation was in place, we have really tripled our supply. Every year the supply has been more than tripled from the previous year, and as you can see, we are quite hopeful to bring on stream in the next couple of years almost 20 petajoules of supply, for a total of about 40 petajoules. We flow about 200 petajoules of energy today through our grid, so about 40 of that is roughly about 20%. So we are absolutely on track to meet the provincial target. In fact, we've already exceeded our provincial target right now and looking at more aggressive targets here. To ensure that we're not just able to meet the demand for our transportation customers, but that brings me to my last slide. And along with transit agencies, we also have marine customers. So Seaspan Ferries, which runs on LNG, recently adopted renewable LNG as well. So we have a wider demand than transit agencies, and we're fully gearing up to supply that demand. I think that's the end of my presentation, and I'll be happy to take any questions along with the other panelists.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Arvind. Good to hear a bit more about the low carbon fuel standard and the impact of other regulations on RNG supplies in BC. We've got a bunch to discuss. I reckon we're going to discuss a fair bit about fuel supply here for sure. Contracting and how it works for transit agencies, especially. And then the anticipated trajectory of RNG prices. Before that, just to make things a little more clear, I'll start off with Parvathy here. Parvathy, if you can just revisit the background on RNG real quick. If you can please elaborate on how the lower percentage RNG blends would still be zero emissions through the life cycle. Especially given tailpipe emissions, just for a bit more clarity on that. I welcome Steve or Arvind to chime in as well. Parvathy.
Yeah, so thank you, Soumya. In terms of the science behind it, I think the video that Steve shared is having it all in the nutshell there. Basically, although the tailpipe emission is there, and that has of course, when you look at a zero emission solution, people typically perceive it as zero tailpipe emissions, and RNG is actually taking it a step beyond that. It is not just with the tailpipe emission. So this methane, if he weren't using it for creating RNG, like generating RNG, it would have dissipated in the atmosphere, and it has a GWP, like the global warming potential, that is 25 times higher than CO2, and would have caused the environmental damage on the other side of the equation. So if we are able to leverage the potential of the RNG, of the methane, which would have otherwise dissipated in an RNG fuel solution, and utilize it for the buses, the way that it would work is, even though there is a tailpipe emission overall from the life cycle of the bus, from the operational side, from the fuel side, you would be having a zero emission solution that is complementary to battery electric and hydrogen as well. So that has been our position at CUTRIC when we do modeling, because we have modeled multiple transit agencies fleet, and we have considered hydrogen, we have considered battery electric. But what we find at the end of most modeling studies is there is a potential for an additional third line of complementary solution that can be the CNG RNG blend, and that is really applicable in cases where battery electric buses are not able to meet the service requirements that agencies would have, or hydrogen is not able to meet for whatever reason. And then there can be that third option, that is fueled using CNG and RNG. And transit agency like HSR are already showing that a zero emission bus is possible with RNG. So we can leverage that opportunity and make the environmental business case solid.
Sure. Thanks, Parvathy. Actually, so it looks like the environmental business case is pretty much solid. We're pretty much there. Well, as far as the transit perspective is concerned, Maureen, I do recognize that that there's been work on a pilot at the City of Hamilton. What's next as far as rolling stock deployment is concerned? What about confidence in scaling that rolling stock procurement? What do we need, what do we need to do before the next steps for scale deployments? Is it just a matter of sorting out supply security now, or are there any other pending concerns?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, our pilot has been very successful, and now we're looking at what could be the steps so that we could scale it. Can we expand it into more of our fleet? And it really comes down to looking at supply chain availability and supply contract with our partner, which is obviously Steve's on the call, which is Enbridge. And so we are right now doing an assessment to determine what the cost differential would be if we were to start fueling more of our buses with RNG as opposed to CNG. And like I said, Hamilton is really on quite a quick trajectory to get the rest of the diesel buses out of our fleet. So for us, when we look at sort of future propulsion systems, we are really uniquely positioned to use RNG strategically as a way to kind of get there faster before we have to look at any kind of different technology that would create a significant swing. So that's what we're studying right now and seeing how we can put more RNG into our fleet to help us hit net zero faster.
For sure. Thanks, Maureen. And that does move us straight into one of the recent audience questions here. So one of our audience members is a bit curious about supply challenges for RNG across the country. And so, recognizing the Hamilton situation, Steve, Arvind, if you can please elaborate on your understanding of RNG supply security or possibilities across Canada, in fact. I'll start with you, Steve. Yeah, if you can shed some light there.
Yeah, for sure. Great question. And a couple thoughts on it. One is, Enercan put out a call for new RNG supplies about a year ago, and I can say that, without revealing the confidential applications of various participants, we as the gas distribution utility in Ontario were involved with the RNG suppliers in evaluating their ability to get into our system with their supply. So we're aware of 55 different project applications for new RNG supplies that were submitted as part of that intake program with Enercan. And Enercan is in the process of evaluating those submissions and determining which ones will be funded, but we're expecting a significant increase in RNG availability here in Ontario for sure. And it was a nationwide program, so I suspect the same is true across the country. So that's my quick feedback there. And just one of the other things I would say is that there's a natural complementary partnership with municipalities, because it's often municipalities that are producing the landfill and the waste product that can actually generate the RNG. So, and a transit application is perfect because it's often a 12 to 15 year life cycle project. So there's a long-term supply need, and that can really underpin the development of RNG facilities if you have that long-term supply availability, and in fact the production of the waste from the same municipality. So it's a real circular economy opportunity there. That'd be my quick take. Arvind may have feedback as well.
Yeah, just two points. The same question was being asked by our government before they gave us the enabling regulations. So right this March 2nd, actually, the British Columbia government, so not somebody else, the government released a report, and the headline was, "New study shows that BC's renewable and low carbon gas could be double current gas use by 2050." So they showed that a study showed that there is a supply potential for renewable gases for as high as 440 petajoules per year, which is probably more than double the amount of gas we flow through our grid today. So that's one aspect. So there is sufficient evidence out there that there is a supply of gas. So the next big question comes is, how do you procure the gas, and how do you strike contracts with these suppliers to give them the certainty that they need, including things like financing and stability and contracts. That's also, I feel we are quite lucky here in British Columbia, because the enabling regulation does allow us to strike contracts, and we are able to flow any differential in rates back through our customers. So we've got some of those mechanisms in place today that is allowed us to procure the gas, and will continue to do so. But I would say one is not just access to gas, but also having mechanisms in place to procure the gas is pretty substantial and pretty critical.
If I could I just jump in with one additional comment? I just wanted to put in perspective volumes, because I know we talk in petajoules and GJs, and in the transit industry that may not be common, but just for reference sake, we're all aware of the federal commitment to 5,000 zero emission buses, and just to put that in perspective of the fuel, assuming roughly 40,000 liters of fuel per year, that in PJ in petajoule terms, that's just about 8 petajoules a year. And so just to put that in perspective, I mean, Arvind talked about some of his supply available. Ontario alone, the easily accessible RNG. So I mentioned that that 55 projects that were submitted. The easily accessible RNG is 25 PJs. So it's in Ontario alone, there's enough to do 3 times what the 5,000 zero emission bus goal is federally. So, supply is there. It needs federal recognition of it as a viable zero emission alternative. And it will happen. It is, as I showed you before, the economics are strong. We just need that pathway to deliver. Thank you.
Speaking of that, Steve, we do have a follow-up question from one of our audience members, and I will jump into discussion of the fuel supply contracting side. But before we move there, a quick question: how much of the current market share of diesel could these RNG supplies realistically replace? If you have any thoughts on that.
Is that for me, or if it is,
Arvind, Steve, either of you have thoughts.
So maybe I'll start, Arvind. Just going back to the numbers I just shared, 25 PJs in Ontario alone can do 15,000 transit buses. So now if you're talking about replacing the entire diesel market, including all the highway tractors and refuse trucks, the market, there's not enough RNG to do every single diesel vehicle in Canada. Well, there could be enough, but they're practically available. So, but transit, which is the focus of this discussion, there's easily enough RNG in the country to do all transit buses in Canada.
Yeah, I think I would say that's pretty accurate, and just bringing the story closer to home here with BC Transit and TransLink. And I know TransLink has been a big supporter of CUTRIC and has been involved in many panels through Ralph, and he's a big proponent of RNG, and then the agency they've been an early adopter. So here, all the CNG buses are running on RNG right now with both TransLink and BC Transit. Like, there is a ramp up plan here. So we had a delayed start with some hiccups in our supply, but now that we are caught up, I would say at least in BC, all the CNG buses, there's about 500 of them. So that's all running on pretty much on RNG here.
Sure. Yeah, and I reckon end of the day, if you look at displacing, a substantial chunk of, let's say, the market share for diesel, of course, that's where we look at other alternative fuels as well, because we also do recognize that it's not just one fuel that has to, help us meet our emission reduction targets. That said, yeah, coming back to the procurement side, though, I'll go back to Maureen. Maureen, the first thing that comes to mind from the transit perspective, are long-term, gas procurement contracts amenable to you, and especially, because we're seeing this on the hydrogen front, that it can be difficult for a transit agency to jump into a long-term fuel procurement contract. How does it work on the RNG front? And are you going to be able to maintain operations the same way you have maintained them with diesel procurement, right? If you can shed some light on that.
Sure. So at the City of Hamilton, our energy fleet and facilities department is the one who predominantly looks after procurement of the long-term fuel contracts for the entire fleet, not just transit, but other City of Hamilton vehicles as well. And because we're early in our infancy of how much of our fleet we could potentially convert over to RNG, we're also early in the process of considering a long-term multi-year procurement fuel contract for RNG. Like the pilot has just concluded essentially, and we've extended it for a year. So we're not really in position to talk about entering into a long-term fuel contract at this time, but we are in the exploratory stages because, as I've mentioned, we really see this as a viable option for us on a pathway forward.
Sure. Fair points, Maureen. So yeah, it looks like until we have the right scale, of course, long-term fuel supply contracting isn't really a point of discussion yet. Looking at the challenges that emerge with smaller scales of procurement, I believe the clean fuel standard and the low carbon fuel standard, and instruments such as those do play an important role in actually bringing you as an end use customer closer to diesel parity and basically making the economics tie up properly, right? Because they just give you that additional revenue stream. And so that said, let's visit the clean fuel standard and the low carbon fuel standard. One of the first questions that comes to mind is, how long after the introduction of, let's say, the low carbon fuel standard in British Columbia, did it take for credit revenues to start offsetting the premium associated with a high renewable blend? I noticed, Arun, you shed some light on price parity and the comparative economics there. How long did it take for the LCFS credit revenues to actually start offsetting the high costs of RNG, right? And I ask this question because as we move into the federal clean fuel standard, I wonder how long we'll have to wait until the clean fuel standard becomes a reliable instrument for potential RNG users, right? So if you can shed some light on that.
Sure. And I would preface by saying that this is one of being the most powerful enabling regulations here in British Columbia for the adoption of, low carbon, zero carbon fuels here in British Columbia. Like it has been the most instrumental policy instrument that has allowed transit agencies to not even think about it because they'll get the check after a year. So, I mean, speaking of timelines, yeah, Soumya, I mean, it's been a long journey, and it still continues to be one. I mean, there have been significant resource challenges on the ministries, and it's a bit of a process. In the interest of time, I'll just simply say that when suppliers give us the supply. Like, let's talk about Stormfisher here for a sec. I mean, they're one of the suppliers for us here, and there's a requirement for them to give what we call a CI of their facility, carbon intensity. We have to take that information of the facility and do a full life cycle CI and do a fuel code registration process with the ministry. That's the first step. Is under the RCLFRR, the fuel code process has to be registered. So ministry needs to take some time, have resources on there, and once the code has been registered, then we can go and allocate supply to the customer from that specific project or a combination of projects, depending if it's a weighted average CI or a specific CI. They start paying into the project for a year, and after a year's time, we tell them the facility, the CI, the project, the volume. They have to then go back to the ministry, and then the ministry will validate the information and give them credits, and then they'll go to the open market, and then they'll be able to sell the credits. It seems all complicated, long-winded, but it's come to a point where we have streamlined all of this. But I would say from the time the agencies, say, yeah, I'm going to take RNG, a fuel code has been established, then I would say about 15 months or so, they start getting their checks back. And TransLink has been getting it for CNG for a number of years, and even so for RNG for the last couple of years. So their management is pretty happy about it. Like, it's been a pretty game changer for them, and hence they've started looking at things a bit more differently. Of course, electrification is part of it, but again, that again has been a game changer. So hopefully it answers the question.
Yeah.
Can I just offer one clarifying comment, Soumya? I think this is really important, and it's got to do with price. I think, and again, it's this mixture of units that we deal in, diesel liter equivalents versus PI. I want to be clear that RNG is actually at $25 a GJ. That is equal to $1.05 a diesel liter equivalent. Okay, so just for reference sake, RNG is not expensive when compared to diesel. When compared to CNG, like what Hamilton's using right now at say 40 to 50 cents a diesel liter equivalent, it's expensive, right? So you're giving up some of your savings by going to RNG, but on a diesel comparison, it's on par or potentially better based on today's diesel prices at $1.60 plus. So just want to make sure people are aware of that. When we talk in GJ and PJ units, we sort of confuse and mix people up, but it's not expensive relative to diesel at all. Thank you.
For sure. Yeah. Thanks for the clarification there, Steve. And so it does, again, reinforce the fact that as a solution to phase out your current diesel fleets, RNG is a promising solution, as we understand from Maureen and some of the experiences at Hamilton. It is definitely a worthy solution to consider, especially looking at the circular economy potential. Well, we do also understand that we've got enabling regulation, and we've got a jurisdiction in Canada where we can learn from. We also understand that we've got promising supply sources as well, and a lot of interested parties in supplying renewable natural gas. In the interest of time, a final quick fire round. We've got all these positives. What are the last remaining challenges? And yeah, I'll start with Arvind here, and then move on to Steve and Maureen, and then Parvathy. Arvind, what do you think needs to be looked at? Like, what next? How do we, get moving with RNG fleets?
Well, I think a lot of it has already been discussed here, so I don't want to repeat a lot of the same points. But I think scalability of supply and really showing that supply availability is there at an attractive or economical price point, and having a form of LCFS or CFS being adopted at a national level, I think will certainly set the right direction. And the other good piece is a lot about is education, and I think we've come a long way as an industry, and I think there is still some more work to be done, but it's really about the diversified pathway. Like, that's our fundamental belief. It shouldn't be a debate about whether it should be battery, electric, hydrogen, or RNG. I think we have to do all of it as a community, as an industry, to get there, and each has a role and a solution and an application to play. And so that's kind of my last
Sure. Any other messages to add to Arvind's message there, Steve, especially for our audience before we part?
Yeah, just to piggyback though on Arvind, I think number one is we need federal recognition. We have a brilliant program out right now for zero emission buses with plenty of funding. I think allowing RNG to be able to compete on its emissions performance, carbon emissions performance with other options like hydrogen and battery electric. I think getting that recognition federally and allowing this to be a solution in that program based on its emission performance will bust open the door for this solution, because as you can see from the economics I shared earlier, it just makes sense. And it's a lot, the deployments are very simple, relative, and it's complementary to battery electric, where, you know, in cases where range is a problem or hilly terrain and so forth, and you can't quite get there with battery electric. So I think it's a brilliant complementary solution that could be available to fleets, and we just need recognition politically that it's an option. Thank you.
Sure. Maureen, any final thoughts, especially from one transit agency to another, or even any audience members from the government?
Well, Steve stole my thunder. I wish you'd asked me the question before him. But I would agree. There's a policy piece here that is not aligned with our overall goals as an industry. From my perspective, the benefits of RNG really include rapid deployment for a transit agency. So if you're sitting in my position and you're looking at electrification as a significant disruptive project that is going to need multiple years to deploy successfully, RNG falls into the category of easy adoption and relatively simple to move in that category in that way. For me, as I said, it's a policy issue. There's a huge disconnect between the goals that we're trying to accomplish and the tools that are available to transit agencies to do so.
For sure. Thank you, Maureen. And Parvathy, from the point of view of a leading nonprofit, that is all about low carbon smart mobility, and that deals with a variety of technologies. Your final thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think, Arvind, Maureen, and Steve mentioned it all, but the two key pieces are knowledge and policy, right? So we got to be empowering our stakeholders with the knowledge of the technology, what is the art of the possible there, which not-for-profits like CUTRIC are leading with the partnership of our utilities and our transit agencies. But the second piece is always in the policy and the recognition of this as a zero emission solution, because on one side we would be having like interested stakeholders wanting to go, but they may be facing the funding gap which needs to be resolved through a funding program or a recognition of that sort. Yeah,
sure. So some great insights here. Thank you so much to our panelists. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but yeah, final reminder would be sorting your compost really does have value. So yes, we look forward to further discussion with the audience members. By the way, thank you for joining us, to our audience members as well. We look forward to further discussion at the networking session at 2:15 EST as well. And we would also like to invite you to the sponsor exhibits that follow this panel. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks a lot, everyone.